Okay. Am I be heard? Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Professor.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll start from I'm starting all over again. So thanks for being with me today again in this course. We are doing behavioral finance 2. We started with behavioral finance 1 last time. We may have another session on behavioral finance. It just depends on how much I'll be able to make it today. We started talking about the difference between beliefs and action in determining our decisions. And I mentioned that on both beliefs and actions, rationality needs to be applied in order to make a rational decision making. And in both fronts, it's both emotions and cognition that builds up these biases and distortion of rationality. Furthermore, I mentioned that emotions, unlike cognition, takes a larger part of these biases and these effects. I started talking about beliefs and the way both cognition and emotions affect beliefs. What I'll do today mostly is talking about actions, mainly financial action, and the way they are affected primarily by emotions, okay? But before going into actions, I'm going to say something. I'm going to tell you a story about one of the biases that I discussed last time in the context of belief, which is what I called overconfidence or wishful thinking, right? Or the idea that sometimes, especially when things bad might happen to us, we tend to think it's not us. We are defended. We're not going to have COVID-19. We're not going to be part of an accident. We are not going to fail an exam. It's something that happens to other people, okay? And I want to tell you, it's a story, but it's a real story that very nicely demonstrates this effect. It will take me a few minutes, but I think it's a good story to share with you because it's a stunning story. It's a story that I heard from Kenneth Arrow. Kenneth Arrow is one of the leading economic theorists in the 20th century. He got the Nobel Prize very early in the 70s. He was basically the founder of much of what we know today in economic theory, and many of the models that were developed in the second part of the 20th century were following the stuff that he was doing earlier. I had a stunning work with Ken Arrow on the summer school that we organized here in Israel. We worked together managing the summer school for a decade, for 10 years, in which we brought every year about 100 students from around the world to take part in 2 weeks studies in economics, mainly economic theory, but not only. Each year on a different subject, and it's still carried out here in Jerusalem. Kenneth Arrow was involved during World War II in advising the Pentagon, and there were several units that were doing it. One of them was part of Operation Research. Operation Research at that time was starting flourishing, and the US Army made a lot of use of insights from Operation Research. And Ken Arrow had some friends who worked in this unit, and he was telling me about their experience. And I'm gonna tell you about the story, what I call the story of the island of Saipan. The island of Saipan is a very famous island in the Pacific, which was a very, very important strategic location during World War II for the Americans, because this was basically the only location in which aircraft could tank between the west coast of the United States and Japan if they wanted to do the flight between these two locations through the Pacific Ocean, okay? And it was extremely important for the military to take over this island, which early 40s was at the hand of the Japanese, okay? And they decided that in order to do so, in order to conquest this island, they needed to go through two phases. In phase one, the idea was to bomb from the air the forces, the Japanese forces that are on this island, to the extent that they will be weak enough to allow the Marines to move in without too many casualties, okay? And it was known exactly how much bombing, okay, in terms of the weight of the TNT is required to do this mission. It was also known there was a specific Air Force unit with a certain number of pilots that was in charge on this mission without any help from every other unit, okay? But the question was how to go about doing this mission, okay? There was a trade-off here. The more TNT you load on an aircraft, the worse the aircraft is being able to maneuver against Japanese artillery, anti-airplane artillery, okay? Okay? These flights were very, very risky, okay? So there were basically two strategies, two types of strategies that the operation research people had to decide upon. One with the precise values of how much TNT each flight would have, okay? One type of strategy is to do many flights, okay? Potentially requiring each pilot to do two missions, to fly twice, or maybe three times. But each airplane will carry very little weight of bombing in each flight, which will allow each pilot to fully control the airplane and return with a higher probability. I won't say very high probability, but a substantial probability of getting back home, okay? Because they can control the airplane, they can escape Japanese artillery, okay? The alternative strategy was to do only few flights, and on each flight to load the airplane very heavily with a lot of bombing. You'll reach the target of the specific TNT tones that require before the Marines are moving in. You'll be able to reach this target with much less flights, okay? But each flight will be more risky, okay? And the trade-off is either more flight and making each of them more risky. Sorry, either more flight and making each of them safer, or less flights and making each of them more risky. And the objective was very precise, to have the strategy that minimizes casualties. Alternatively, the strategy that maximizes the probability of each pilot in this unit to survive the mission. Nothing else. And this type of mission is clear that you either come out uninjured or you don't come out of it, okay? The chances of being injured in such a mission is very low. The chances of not coming back is substantial, however, okay? So these mathematicians were sitting on this problem for weeks. They collected a lot of data. They analyzed the techniques of the Japanese artillery, the machinery of the airplanes, the psychology and the capabilities of the skills of the pilots and everything. And after a few weeks, they came out with one ambiguous optimal strategies that they all supported. They came back to their generals and said, there is nothing better to do than what we suggest to you. Everything else would cause more life to reach the target. Now I'm going to tell you what they suggested. They suggested to do the following. First, you run a lottery and select 25% of the pilots in this unit. Just 25%. You then send the 75% who were not selected back home and tell them, you're on vacation, you're not going to take part in this mission. You're sent back home. We don't need you. The 25% that were selected, each of them is going to go on an airplane which will be loaded with bombs to the extent that it can be tanked with gas, only to make a one-way trip. Okay, so it will be heavily loaded with bombing, and they will be tanked only to allow them to do the way to the island, but not the way back. Okay, so they will be sent with one-way ticket. Okay, this would conclude the mission with probability of 25% of survival, right? If you fall in the first lottery, if you are part of the mission, and this has a chance of 25% exactly, you'll die for sure. But you have a priori, before this lottery is played, you have 75% of making it alive without any injury. Every other strategy that increases your chances to come back, because we put more petrol, we put more gas in your tank, in the tank of your airplane, every strategy of that sort will increase the expected number of casualties. And in another word, will increase the probability of each of you pilots to not survive this mission, okay? To die in this mission. Okay, so what these general did after they received this recommendation was simply to bring it to the pilot and let them decide whether they want to have it. Okay, and as you might expect, they all rejected this proposal. Okay, they all rejected this proposal and requested that there will be no lottery, that all of them will participate, knowing that the number of casualties, each one's own probability of surviving will be lower. Knowing? Maybe not. Maybe each of them thought that he is better than the other pilots. Okay? He could manage this flight or several flights and survive with a probability much higher than 25%. This is, of course, incorrect, right? So there might be other reasons why these pilots rejected it. Some people may say it's unethical to use such a mechanism by which people fly knowing that they will die in the mission, okay? But definitely one of the reasons why this strategy was rejected so broadly, namely nobody supported it among the pilots, was to some extent a result of overconfidence, of it won't happen to me, or alternatively, it will happen to me, but with substantial lower probability that it might happen to others, okay? This is how the island looks today. It's a tourist resort. This is how it looked back in the end of the 40s. Interestingly, after the voting took place, a different island, not far from Saipan, was taken over much more easily, and the necessity of taking Saipan at that stage of the war was much smaller, okay? So the mission was entirely canceled. The island was taken over later, I think in 44, it was taken by the Americans. And I think it's still under American hands. So it was never even back to the Japanese, okay? So this is an example of overconfidence. Okay, we now want to move to bounded rationality at the level of actions, okay? And as I mentioned, almost all causes here are emotional, not cognitive. And this is why it's harder to deal with, okay? Cognition is something that, you know, if something is too complicated and you are explained that you made a mistake because you haven't seen things correctly, you haven't judged things correctly, next time when you face a similar problem, you may do it better, right? But if the difficulty is emotional, it's a completely different type of barrier. And indeed, this is also a barrier from which also people who are professionals, right? Portfolio managers, brokers, and professors in finance are exposed to, and that's what makes it much more difficult to deal with. One major, much of these barriers come from the famous phenomena of Kahneman and Tversky, called losses loom greater than gains, okay? It's a very simple assertion that has been also proved empirically about the arithmetic of gains and losses, okay? What it says is basically that if you have done a certain investment and lost 1,000 euro today, and then a day later win 1,000 euro, okay? The experience of losing mentally will be so much greater, or greater, I don't know how much greater, but definitely greater than the positive experience of winning 1,000, okay? So the overall experience of not losing anything, because if you lost 1,000 in the first day and won 1,000 in the next day, you are even, right? But because losses loom greater than gains, the overall experience would be negative, okay? Our mental accounting respond, the other phenomena is that our mental accounting responds to percentages rather than absolute value. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are about to buy a car, and so you go down to the dealer and you get an offer, for 20,000 pounds for a car that you like, okay? And just before you take out the credit card, someone tells you, you know what, if you take the bus and drive like 10, 20 minutes to the other side of the city, you can get the same car with the same condition, with the same contract for 10 pounds less. It's very unlikely that you're going to take any effort to save 10 pounds on a car that costs 20,000, okay? Now let me put this story in a different frame and suggest that you are going into some computer shop and you're going to buy a USB card or a charger for your smartphone, and it's cost 10 pounds, okay? And this same guy, just before you take out your card, is telling you, listen, if you take the bus like 15 minutes from here, or even less, okay, I don't know, we can make it 20, okay? If you take the bus right a little bit, there is a guy there that have a similar shop, and he sells the car not for 10 pounds, but for 5 pounds. So it's 50% off. There would be much more people that would be willing to exert the effort for this 50% off 5 pound on a 10 pound purchase. And those people who will be willing to save 5 pounds on a car that costs 20,000, okay? That's because we're thinking about differences in money in terms, differences in prices in terms of percentage, okay? From a rational point of view, this is questionable. Because in both cases, okay, you would make the same saving of 5 pounds, okay? But no, we feel differently when we save 5 pounds from a price which is 10 pounds, or we save 5 pounds from a price which is 20,000. These phenomena, basically the phenomena of losses loom greater than gains is captured in this description of the utility function that's part of prospect theory of Kahneman and Tversky, that suggests two things. That suggests that our utility function is concave in this region, has marginal declining utility in the positive region, and has also declining marginal disutility, okay? Or alternatively, it's convex in this part in this region of payoffs, okay? And the way we can think about it, why is it this case? Why do we behave like this? Well, it's easy to understand the intuition behind this part of the utility function. Because, you know, if we are terribly poor and we are offered 10 pounds, it's an enormous difference for us. If we have $1 million in the bank, okay, then an extra 10 pounds would not change much in our life, okay? The intuition for this is similar. It says, listen, the first, you know, if you suffered the first loss of 10 pounds, it's going to be more severe in terms of the mental influence on you than the suffering you will experience after you lost already 1,000 pounds, and there is another loss of 10 pounds, okay? It might work out when we talk about money, but the big questions are very often raised to my students is whether it would apply in other areas of life. And in many areas of life, and this is obvious, this is of course something very, very subjective. Each person can come with different answer to this question. But suppose bad things are starting to pile over you, okay? You first got COVID-19, and then you were sucked from your job, and then your girlfriend left you, and then God forbid, mom died. And these things just went on and on. I think at some stage or very early in this process of terrible events, you would feel that the marginal suffering is increasing, not decreasing, but increasing. The reason for that is that to deal with suffering, to deal with bad things that happen to us, we need resources. We need mental resources. And when these mental resources start to exhaust, the suffering grows very rapidly, okay? So although prospect theories suggest this picture, I very often tell my students, be careful about it, okay? It may apply for some areas, but not for all. And whether it applies for the way you deal with your bad things that happen to you is something that only you can answer, okay? It has nothing to do with rationality, okay? Even here, if you have an increasing marginal utility in the positive region of the utility function, it would never suggest that you are not rational. It would mean that you are risk lover, okay? But not that you are irrational. Being risk lover is not being irrational. Many psychologists who do behavioral economics don't understand this. For them, risk aversion is rationality and risk loving is irrationality. There is nothing irrational in being risk loving, okay? The entire thing about comparing preferences over lotteries is exactly like comparing taste of fruits. We would never say that somebody who likes banana over a grapefruit is more rational than the guy who likes grapefruit more than banana. It's ridiculous, right? Okay. On the same token, someone who prefers lottery A to lottery B is saying nothing about his rationality compared to somebody who prefers lottery B to lottery A, perhaps only in one case, in which lottery A, okay, wins more money at every state of the world, okay? Only when we have something like that, we can say the one who chooses the lottery, which brings less money no matter what happens, has some problem with rationality. But in any other case, okay, a taste about lotteries is just a taste, okay? And being risk lover is just having a different taste about lottery compared with somebody who is risk averse. Okay. What this picture is saying is that when we, and this might be again possible for some people, maybe for the majority of us, that we are risk loving in this negative region of lotteries, although we are risk averse about these positive region of lotteries. Okay, so what it means is that most people will prefer to get for sure 7,500 euro than participating in a lottery which awards them 5,000 with probability 1/2 and 10,000 with probability of 1/2, right? The reason is that the expected value of the lottery is exactly 7,500, okay? And if you have two lotteries that have the same expected value, risk aversion, if you are risk averse, and most people are definitely risk averse on the positive region of payoffs. So if you are risk averse and you have two lotteries that produce the same return, the same expected value, you would choose the one who is riskless or you choose the one who has less risk. And in this case, the sure payment is the least possible, has the least possible risk. Okay? What this picture that I showed you before means on the negative region is the following. What would you prefer? Let me ask you. Suppose you conducted a serious violation of the law, and you ought to pay a fine, a severe fine, and you are told that you can choose between two courts, okay? In court A, there is a judge who knows to give a fine for this type of crime or a violation. He would give you a fine of 7,500 no matter what's his mood, okay? In the other court, there is a judge that, one day he comes with a good mood, and one day he comes with a bad mood. When he comes with a good mood, it's going to be 5,000. When he comes with a bad mood, it's going to be 10,000 fine, okay? And it is known that his mood is either good or bad with equal probabilities, okay? Which court you would prefer now? According to Kahneman and Tversky, you would prefer the second court, because now payoffs are negative, and claim is most people are risk loving on negative payoffs. So you'd prefer the lottery, which charges you 5,000 with probability 1/2 and 10,000 with probability 1/2 to a certain fine of 7,500. Okay? It's intuitive. I wouldn't argue with this assertion. I would argue with the assertion of risk loving or convex utility function or declining disutility when it gets to more serious stuff than losing money, more serious stuff that can happen to us in relationships, in health, in our status, in all sorts of fronts. Now, it turns out that most of the biases that arise from actions in financial decision-making can be attributed to what we call regret, okay? And regret, the issue of regret is not sufficiently looked by behavioral economists, unfortunately. I think it's the most important concept, one of the two most important concepts in behavioral economics. It is responsible to so many types of behaviors that we display that it really pays off to understand it and invest a lot of resources, mainly intellectual resources, to understand it well. What is regret? Where do we have it? Why do we have it? Well, regret is an evolutionary mechanism. Okay? It's an evolutionary mechanism that facilitates learning. Okay? We cannot learn without the mechanism of regret. We would never internalize a mistake. Okay? What regret does, it sort of puts a print in our brain whenever we do something that we realize was wrong, we suffered from. It puts a print in our brain that whenever we find ourselves in a similar situation, before we really get all the details, something pops up and says, you know, watch it. You've been here before. Okay, take care. Okay, if we didn't have a regret and we had to remember the details and analyze them and say, yeah, we did this last time and it ended up badly, and maybe this situation is similar to what we did last time, it's going to be so complicated, so obscure, that we're simply going to repeat our mistakes. Okay? Instead, regret is very instantaneous. It's very sharp. It's very effective. Okay? But regret works in all sorts of magical ways, which are non-symmetric. Okay? There's no single way it operates on us. Let me give you some example. Regret due to an action that caused us to lose money or to some loss is greater than the regret we will experience when a similar loss is due to failing to act, okay? When we move from the status quo, when we move away from where we are and suffer, we regret it much more than when we remain in the place we are and get the same level of loss. Okay? This is, by the way, one of the reasons that it is often very hard for us to change a job. Even when we realize the downside in the current job we're having. Because losing the current job and getting into a different job may yield losses and may yield gains. But if the overall calculation is loss, we will regret it much more than when we realize that staying in our current job was a mistake. Okay? You know, I talked about jobs. It applies the same about spouses. Okay? Perhaps regret or the fear of regret is one of the things that make people remain in marriages that should have broken years before. Okay, again, when you end relationship, whereas marriage or otherwise, you move out of the status quo. Okay, if you afterwards realize that you made a mistake, you are going to suffer much more than when you realize that staying in the marriage or staying in the relationship was a mistake. Okay, and the fear of regret actually lock us to do the same. I'm going to refer to it later as the status quo bias, but it's important, we're talking about finance, it's important to understand that much of these insights that I'm discussing today have bearing and implication in sphere of life which are very different than finance. Okay, so I want you to think about these biases more broadly than just in the context of investing money. Let's move on. Regret from a mistake shared by many individuals is less severe relative to being the only person who made this mistake. Okay, we often call it misery likes company. Okay, you know, if everybody made the mistake, you know, I regret it, but I say to myself, how could I have known that it's a wrong decision? After all, everyone made the same decision, so I'm not so stupid. Okay? It will also have implication about the way we behave. We'll see it very soon. Regret is greater the closer we are to doing the right thing. Okay? My father never stopped in his life complaining about these real estate opportunities that he was missing in the 50s. Okay? Okay? they moved from a small apartment to a larger one, and they had two options. They wanted to buy something in a very nice place in Jerusalem, which was very expensive. And there were two options. There was one option which was single family house with a big property, with a big land. This place is called Beta Keren in Jerusalem, with a big land. But this house, you know, you had to renovate it. It was in a bad shape. Well, you could stay in it, you know, save some money until the kids come and then renovate it. But it meant a few years of living in some weird conditions, okay? The other opportunity was to buy a condo in a big, large apartment building, okay? With like 20 neighbors, much smaller, like 60 square meter, but newly built. And he went for this option. And the reason why he was so so heavily affected by this for many years was basically because he was almost there to sign the contract on the single house property, single family house property, okay? So it was, they had an appointment, and he and my mom thought it over again, and at the last minute canceled it, okay? So the more we are there to making the right decision and avoided doing it, the more we suffer from regret. When the option of doing the other thing, which is better, was obscure, abstract, remote, we don't really suffer. We don't really suffer from regret. If his only engagement with this alternative was that he drove through this house and saw it and said, well, that's the same price like the apartment I'm considering, and that's all, he would not remember it anymore. It would have been gone. But the fact that he was so close to it, almost signing it, and avoided it, made regret much more severe and prevailing for many years. Now, the problem with regret is not experiencing regret, okay? It's okay to experience regret, you know. It's the regret itself doesn't bring us to do wrong thing. The thing that brings us to do, the thing that takes us away from rational decision making is not regret itself, but the fear of regret. Because we are fearing, because we contemplate and we expect that if we do something, we are asking ourselves, how much I'm going to regret it if I realize that I made a mistake. This turns out to be a very important determinant in the way we make decisions. Okay? And the more we expect regret to make us suffer, the more we avoid this type of decision. And sometimes we avoid very correct decision just because of the fear of the regret. And the fact that the regret is coming under certain circumstances that we expect the regret, the volume of regret, or the intensity of regret to be severe because of the circumstances under which it's made, okay? What I'm going to do now, I'm going to discuss with you a list of biases that are all affected by regret. They are all to be attributed to regret, basically not to regret, but for the fear of regret. You will recognize some of them from your own life, I'm sure. I'm sure that many of well, some of it will be about decisions that are more typical for, you know, big professional financial people, like portfolio managers, not to individuals, but many of these biases you'll see applying in other spheres than finance, and even in finance you'll see that you are being affected by them as well. I'll start with something that is called the disposition effect, or some other people call it holding tight to a losing asset. Okay, what is the disposition effect? Say you bought a certain stock or bought a certain portfolio through a fund, mutual fund, right? And then after some time, you realize that your investment was losing money. Okay, you bought this stock for $1,000, and now after a couple of months, regardless what caused it, it's now worth only $800. Okay, so you can decide, should I sell it or should I wait until it picks up again? Okay, most of us in these circumstances would say, I'm not selling something in a loss. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait till it recovers. I need at least the money I put, and I'm not leaving it before I get back what I put in. Is it reasonable? Well, it depends on what you know about this stock, what you know about the company, what you know about the market. But this is very often irrelevant for the decision whether to hold the stock or to sell it. Okay? Why do we hold to losing assets? Well, it's not because we expect them to gain value. Okay, maybe the company is doing so badly that it can only lose, that this stock can only lose value, or it can lose value with a much higher probability than gaining. Okay, the reason why we hold it is precisely because of regret. Okay, if I'm selling the stock now, I'm paying cash in terms of regret. It becomes clear to me that the decision to buy it in the first place was wrong, and I'll now have to pay for it. And regret charges me. It charges me now and in certainty. If on the other hand, I'm holding it, I haven't made any decision. I do two things. First, I defer the regret to the future. I don't have to pay it now because I haven't done anything. I'll may pay it in the future, okay? And always, you know, bad things to defer, bad things to the future is always something attractive to do, right? We want money now, and we want bad thing to happen in the future, not now, okay? So we are deferring the regret, and we also generate a certain probability by which we will not experience regret at all, because maybe the value of the stock will go up again. Okay? So this is the disposition effect. My friend and co-author, Yevgeny Mogerman, who might be one of the audience today, and I were trying to look at the opposite phenomenon, which we encountered in a certain market. We'll be trying to see if it confirms itself in other markets, but it's exactly the reverse phenomenon, but interestingly generated by the same force of regret. And I'm referring to something that we call the exposition effect. Okay? To explain what the exposition effect, I'm going to describe to you what we saw in the data. So I'm referring to a data that, that consists of the prices at which paintings, Chinese painting in the Chinese market, painting were sold and bought by collectors, okay? And what we found out there is when the price of a painting, when the value of a painting, the market value of a painting goes down, it makes people to wish to get rid of it faster than for painting whose market value go up. So if your painting become less valuable, if you bought it high and now it's less valuable, you won't hold it tight. Unlike a stock, you would hurry to sell it out. Why would you do something like that to a painting, which you don't do to a stock? Well, what's the difference between a stock and a painting? Well, a stock is something abstract. You don't see a stock on your wall. You don't see it on your desk. It's virtual. It's in the bank. It's registered somewhere. But it's not something you can touch or see. On the other hand, a painting, which is also an investment, but it's also a consumption. You put it on the wall, and every morning when you get your coffee, you can look at it and say, what a great deal I made on this. What a great deal, okay? And you enjoy it, okay? However, if it turns out at some stage not to be such a great deal because the value has been deteriorating, then you don't want to look at it anymore. Then in terms of consumption, you get this regret punching you in the face every morning on your coffee table. That's not fun to have, okay? So unlike a stock, if your painting are losing money, you'd better get rid of them, okay? And that's generates the exposition effect. The reason we call it exposition is because when it's painting, you are exposed to it, okay? You and potentially your friends. When your friends come to visit you and they look at this painting and say, oh, really, it's a nice painting, how much you paid for it? And then they would also ask how much the value is today, and then you will have to be silent about it, okay? You don't like to, if it's lost value, you don't like your friends to know about it. You better get rid of it. Hell with it, okay? It's mainly regret, plus some social pressure or wanting to portray yourself as being smart vis-a-vis other investors, okay? But very similar, very emotional, nothing cognitive here. The sunk cost paradox, every one of us has been exposed to it, every one of us, okay? You started a new project in your working place, okay? It requires a lot of effort, okay? And you spend a lot of energy, a lot of time, and you realize at some stage that unfortunately it's going nowhere, okay? You have two options. You can say, it doesn't worth the effort, I'm going to shut it down and start something else. Or alternatively, you can say, I've put so much into it, it's going to be stupid to get rid of everything, put everything back to the garbage bin and start something else. And this last argument is what we usually say and force ourselves to remain in projects that deliver nothing, okay? The reason is very much the same as the disposition effect, okay? If we close it down and start something else, we pay regret now in cash. If we hang on to this project and continue it, maybe it will eventually succeed. And if it won't succeed, we're not paying any regret now, we'll pay it in the future, okay? It's just replacing project with stock. You'll get the sunk cost story is identical to the disposition effect. Nothing different. And also the status quo bias to some extent, okay? You want to remain in the status quo because, again, if you move out of the status quo, you do something actively. So there are two things. First of all, regret is likely to punch you harder on the face if you make a mistake when you moved from the status quo. And secondly, if you move from the status quo and you realize that you made a mistake, you're going to realize very soon. And so you will have to pay the cost of regret very soon. Whereas if you hang on with your job or with your relationship, you can defer this so-called conclusion that you were wrong to some later stage of your life, okay? And therefore, you defer regret. Now, there are a few things that are slightly different, but also have affected, very heavily affected by regret and the fear of regret. And one thing I'm referring to is the herd behavior, which we all know about, okay? We want to behave in some way similar to what other people do, okay? Especially when it gets to finance. If the market is going up and you'll see lots of people are getting into the market, you tell to yourself, well, I'm going to be crazy to stay out, right? You know, everybody is making money. Why should I stay out? Okay. Well, the reasoning is, let's move in with the crowd. If I made a mistake by moving in, I'm going to penalize less because I'm part of a crowd who took this decision. I'm going to be penalized less if the decision was wrong to move into the market than if I stay out and realize that the decision was wrong. If I stay out and make a wrong decision, then I'm alone in making such wrong decision, and I'm penalized twice because everybody else did something else, and I was the sole stupid guy, the only stupid guy who stayed out. And of course, it also applies for moving out of the market. If the market starts going down and everybody is selling, I want to sell as well. Otherwise, I'll realize that I was the only stupid guy who remained inside when the market was experiencing this crash. Okay? So very often people are attributing herd behavior to all sorts of complicated models like processing information, okay? And the idea is that people might behave like a herd because when lots of people are doing something, this is a stronger signal because of their own knowledge that this other thing is better, okay? And so we tend to ignore our own information. That might be an explanation to some types of herd behavior, but not for all of them, okay? In some of them, we join the herd just because we expect a mistake to be less painful for us than when we make a mistake by being the only guy who made it. The Ostrich Effect is also a very nice bias, very interesting bias. which Orly Sadeh, Professor Orly Sadeh, she is a professor of finance at the Hebrew University, my co-author, a friend. And I think one of the few, this is very troubling, one of the very few professors of finance in Israel. Okay, finance tend to be a male type of expertise. But surprisingly, in Israel, in which women are doing well in terms of being very active in management, in politics, in all sorts of fields, and all sorts of territories of very top jobs. In finance, we don't see, in academic finance, we don't see enough women joining this profession, and we should. I'm telling my friends we should do more on this as well. What Orly with her co-author Dan Galai found is that people process information differently, whether they expect the information to be positive or negative. Okay? Or more precisely, people choose to ignore information when they expect this information, or expect the news to be bad news. On the other hand, if they expect the news to be good news, they are attracted to seek for this information. That's why they called it an ostrich effect, because the ostrich, it's exactly what the ostrich does. It puts its face into the sand and avoid its surrounding, right? It's avoid generating information. The way they found it is by looking at the propensity by which people are opening the envelope that are sent to them by the bank about their monthly statement, let's say of the portfolio, of their investment, right? In good and bad times in the market, okay? And it turns out that in bad time of the market, only say 1% of the people would open their envelope with the report of how their portfolio is doing. In bad time, there would be much more of them doing it, right? Obviously not rational, because information is valuable, no matter if it's bad or good, right? I would say more than that. I would say that it's more valuable in bad times than in good times, because you can do something. You can, you know, if you're losing money and you need money and you need this investment to buy a car or to help your kids into university, then it's more important that you look at your portfolio, at your investment in bad times. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. People will ignore information in bad times, and they ignore it because they want to avoid regret. If they expect bad news, they say to themselves, no, I'm going to open this envelope and see that I've done wrong, and it's going to ruin the night, you know. I need to get a good sleep tonight. Let's get rid of it, okay? Very emotional, very emotional. There's nothing cognitive here, pure emotional. Quo Bias, this is another phenomena that we see mainly portfolio manager affected by. Today, it becomes more of a bias. In the past, it wasn't a bias because you couldn't. Quo Bias referred to the fact that you were investing more in local stocks than in international companies overseas. Okay. In the past, it could have risen from the fact that it's hard to get information, to get data about the state of overseas enterprises and firms. Today, it's not anymore the case. Yet, the reason why investors or a portfolio manager are exposed to this bias is that they would feel, this again is one of the biases of regret itself. We feel more regret when we made a mistake by doing the unconventional thing than when experiencing mistake when doing the conventional thing, right? If we do something very unconventional and it turns out to be wrong, we feel stupid. Why did we do this very unexpected, very non-standard thing? We should have expected that something wrong will come out of it, right? When we do the more standard thing, the more routine thing, and get it wrong, we tend more to we tend to feel less regret and be more lenient about ourselves, less aggressive about ourselves. The decoy bias, and that's the last, I'll end here and we'll continue next time. The decoy bias is also something that is managed or is triggered by emotion, and I'm referring to a situation of violating a very important axiom, the axiom of independent alternative, okay? So the story is the following. Suppose that you come into a restaurant and you have your dinner. Sorry? You have your dinner and then there is a complimentary drink, hot drink after your dinner. And you are offered three options: an instant coffee, a fancy cappuccino with a white cream on it, and a chocolate milk, okay? And suppose you tend to like chocolate milk. Usually you would have chosen chocolate milk. But now the first two options are so different from one another. One is so much better than the other, okay? The fancy cappuccino with white cream as opposed to instant coffee, that you say to yourself, I'm going to choose the one which is clearly better than something else here, avoiding potentially something that you like better than the two others. And how is that to do with regret? Very simply, because you want to convince yourself that you haven't made the worst choice, okay? You're protecting yourself against the worst choice. If you realize eventually that you made the worst choice, it's an awful regret. You were absolutely stupid, absolutely stupid. If you choose for the second best out of the three, okay, so you didn't do the best thing, but you went halfway. You went halfway. Again, very emotional and very much linked to this amazing emotion called regret. I'm going to continue next time. I'm just going to look, if you stay with me, I'm going to look at some of the, if there are some people who had comments or questions, I'm going to address to see, but there is no, okay, sorry, I'll do more. So I see no chat here, so probably no questions. We'll meet next week again, I think for the 6th session of my course. Again, please share with others. I'm very much trying to make each lecture self-contained, and I think I managed to do so far. Have a nice weekend and see you next week. Bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.